Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today for this webinar presented by CloudFactory. Today, Paul and Anne are here to join us and talk about the most common mistakes in data labeling and how to avoid them. They're both great, wonderful speakers and are excited to share some tips and best practices with you all today. Before we introduce them, though, a bit of housekeeping. First of all, we have one handout in the handout section of this webinar, which you can check out if you like. Also, we will be answering questions live at the end of the session today. You can ask questions directly in the questions functionality in the webinar interface, and don't hesitate to ask throughout the webinar. We'll save them for the end, but the more the merrier, so please feel free to ask them throughout the webinar as well. All right, I think that wraps up the housekeeping. So without further ado, I will pass it off to our speakers, Anne Balduino and Paul Christensen. So Anne and Paul, go ahead and introduce yourself in that order and get started.
Yeah. Hey guys. Hey Paul. Good to see you.
Hello.
Yeah, I am one of our senior client success managers here at CloudFactory. My background is almost exclusively in client-facing roles. I've been working in client-facing positions of one kind or another for about 15 years. I've mostly been focused in the e-commerce space up until now, but since I joined CloudFactory about 2.5 years ago, really dove headfirst into AI, machine learning, project management, and have enjoyed just about every minute of it. So my day-to-day is really focused on interacting both with our delivery teams, who are kind of the boots on the ground labeling teams, as well as our clients, and just collaborating to find success and growth within mostly AI projects, and have had a lot of experience with our topics today. Seen a lot of pitfalls, but also a lot of successes. So looking forward to doing some knowledge share today.
Yes, and great to be partnering with you today, Anne. I know we've actually served some clients together, so it's fun to be able to share here in the same forum. But yeah, Paul Christensen, great to be here. I've worn a lot of hats over the years at CloudFactory. Was one of our first employees, and currently I'm the VP of Labeling Solutions here, but for a number of years I led our client success organization. And so since my time at CloudFactory, going back to 2014, I've had the pleasure of working with lots and lots of clients on data labeling engagements, and clients on kind of all sides of the spectrum, or both sides of the spectrum. So small clients who are just kind of getting their labeling operations off the ground, others doing millions or even billions of annotations each month. So through that experience, like Anne, have definitely seen what works and what doesn't. And I guess our hope here today is that by sharing some of the pitfalls that we've seen firsthand, that we can help you avoid some of those in the future. So yeah, without further ado, we'll give you just a brief overview on CloudFactory. So CloudFactory works with companies developing AI for applications like autonomous vehicles and robotics and drone inspection across a range of industries. And yeah, we've really kind of evolved with the market over the past decade. So initially we were kind of serving as that human in the loop, directly kind of powering features in SaaS applications, but in more recent years, we've really helped to be a part of this AI boom in providing companies with high quality data to train and sustain machine learning models. And our solutions are really a combination of people, process, and technology. So today you'll kind of hear from all of those perspectives. It's not just the tools, it's not just the people, it's really bringing those all together. So we've got a workforce in places in the world like Nepal and Kenya. We are inspired by lean manufacturing principles in our process every day, and also provide technology in the form of fit for purpose annotation tools and technology that helps us really manage that human in the loop capacity and performance. And so hopefully everybody here, data labeling is a term that you've at least heard, maybe you've been super deep on. But just even before we get started, so that we're all on the same page, when we're talking about data labeling, we're of course talking about tagging or annotating raw information and that's often in the form of images, text, videos, audio, and it's all in the purpose of teaching a model. So intelligent machines, right? They learn through examples just as people do. And so, yeah, we'll dig into it. So let's go ahead into the next slide. So this is just to kind of set the stage, right? So we've seen definitely the hype of AI for a number of years, and for a while, frankly, right, it took some time in our day-to-day lives and work to see the promise of AI. But things are starting to change, and at least from our perspective, where we're seeing teams be more successful with developing machine learning models is when teams are taking a more data-centric approach. And so they're basically developing the models and the data and working with the algorithms and data in tandem so that they can get these rapid feedback loop cycles and fast iteration. And so data labeling is a really important piece of that, but it does need to support this data-centric approach and avoid the kind of pitfalls we're going to be covering today. All right, so let's move on to the next section here. And so we're going to get into these pitfalls. We've got 5. And the first one is pretty big picture, but really, really important. So certainly, Anne, you probably sympathize with this, but I've had a lot of clients who come to us and they present this need, and they're presenting it in a way that really isn't giving us the full context, right? It's kind of that throw it over the fence problem that sometimes you see when outsourcing goes wrong. And so when this happens, when you don't have the appropriate context, there can be all kinds of issues downstream in the labeling. And yeah, I guess just to kind of put it in terms that maybe we all would understand, it's like, we've probably gotten that email or that Slack from our boss, where's this sort of just really opaque request, nothing around the problem to solve, nothing about why it's important, and you're left kind of wondering, like, where do I start? What's kind of the how do I go about this? And so we're showing here on the slide just an example of the kind of AI application or use case that we see. In this case, a drone delivery use case, and of course, just that lack of specificity is going to be an issue. Even if they've got annotation guidelines that are really precise, you can't possibly have guidelines that are comprehensive enough to cover every edge case. So handling edge cases requires good judgment, and applying good judgment requires good context. So knowing why does it all matter is super helpful. Anne, can you think of an example from your work with clients that comes to mind?
Totally, yeah. And I think that not only from a quality perspective, but also like from a labeler motivation perspective, if they know the whole picture, they can see how they're making an impact, not only with the client, but even for things like, oh, this is helping renewable energy or solving like cures for diseases, etc. But a more tangible example I was thinking about is actually a natural language processing use case rather than computer vision. And we were tasked with evaluating 360 reviews for employees for a consulting agency. And we were doing a pretty good job, and they were actually very pleased with the sentiment analysis we were doing. So we were identifying through these 360 reviews categories of sentiment. Are they empathetic? Are they a good communicator? Are they a strong leader, etc. So we were doing pretty well, and I think the client was happy. But we then asked, hey, can we get a picture of what this is powering? Can you show us the end result? And what they were doing was automating these reports based off of lines and lines and lines of text, and it was boiled down to a really simplified automated report for each of these hundreds of employees. And so just seeing a snapshot of 2 or 3 of those reports, just saying, hey, this employee ABC really needs to work on their communication skills, but they are a fantastic leader and are really good at motivating at the core of it, but communication could use some tweaking, and just seeing how those inputs resulted in this really comprehensive output, and visualizing how it was going to help that company improve their performance really just gave that extra boost of competency, and the labelers were much better at grasping the task once they had that full picture.
Yeah, totally. Just makes it so tangible to know what's the end product to the end customer here, and what's my role in all this. So, you know, to kind of follow the drone delivery example, right? When you have this context, imagine yourself as a human labeler, and you know, you're able to kind of have that light bulb of understanding. So I'm labeling this data because the drone needs to understand where the safe drop zones are, so that it can deliver this package successfully, right? And obviously you need to have a safe and effective package delivery to make it a great experience for the consumer, and you know, have, you know, drone delivery actually widely adopted in homes across the world. And so, you know, if you've got a package landing on a toy or a dog or a clothesline, that's obviously going to be an issue. One of my favorite examples, probably from the past in this area, is I had this, you know, amazing opportunity to travel to our location in Nepal, and I was able to join a client there, and it was a company developing autonomous vehicles. And of course, the mission there is so important, right? You need to get AVs into the market that are first and foremost safe, right? Autonomous vehicles will never be adopted unless you know, society can trust that it's a safer experience than a human being behind the wheel. And so it's just really cool to be in Nepal, in Kathmandu, and have the client to be able to kind of share more color around that. So not just about the technology of the vehicles, but how critical safety was. And we used a lot of that content to build it into the training material for our workforce. And it's just kind of a special bridging of, you know, the work is more important than just, you know, drawing a cuboid around some LiDAR points, right? Like, that feeds into this bigger mission of putting, you know, safe AVs on the road. So yeah, pitfall number one. Hopefully we've hit that one, and let's move on to the next.
Yeah, absolutely. So I see this one a lot. So pitfall number 2 is delivering unclear annotation guidelines. And there's a lot of different flavors of this, but we run into this with a lot of ambiguity in instructions. This that you're seeing on the screen is probably the most extreme of extreme examples. We don't often see this, but this is based on fact. So yeah, there's a lot of confusion on who should own those instructions. Is it the vendor? Is it the labeler? And you know, has that vendor or that person that you're, I'm sorry, have you guys as the client done the task in-house? And are you able to sufficiently explain how to do that to your labeling service? And so we've seen a lot of, you know, in-house work that translates well to external work, but what if you've never done it before? How do you put together good instructions? So Paul, do you have any examples of when you've received less than strong instructions?
I do, and actually I'd say I've had issues in kind of a couple different areas. So both on kind of the actual upfront annotation strategy, and then ultimately kind of how that strategy is written into guidelines. And so, you know, annotation strategy is really, really important when you're developing, you know, ML. There are different approaches: object detection, instant segmentation, and there's, you know, trade-offs between them depending on the, you know, the model objective you have. And recently, I actually had a client that they were kind of going down this path of object detection for their use case, with an assumption that that would be the cheaper route. I mean, drawing a bounding box is not quite as complicated as say a mask, but in reality, actually the mask turned out to be a better approach, because while it is a little bit more complex at like an individual image level, a model learns much faster through that approach. And so we were able to have a good discussion around those trade-offs and ultimately land on what was going to be the overall kind of best business case. So I'd say that's kind of the first piece, and then that informs the guidelines, right, of actually how you write down the rules on how to accurately label the data. And so I've seen in that case, examples where there's too much information, not enough information, and either is kind of a bad thing, right? Because if it's not enough, it's too much to interpretation. If it's too much detail, it can just be way too complicated. And a set of guidelines that's 40 pages is just too dense and too tough to know and to quickly flip back and forth as you're doing the task. So there's kind of a sweet spot there. So yeah, Anne, are you thinking of maybe other examples?
Oh, totally. I have a laundry list, I think, but there's a couple that come to mind. One that did it really well, and then one that was not so great. The not so great example was a medical AI client of ours that really came to us with the best of intentions, trusting that we could really run with the task without much guidance. And it wasn't until we were really in the beginning stages of annotating where we saw large data sets of the images we were intending to annotate. And these were very specific to the specific field that they were in, and required a lot of learning curve on how we could identify certain components of these images that were specific to that medical field. And it took us a long time to subjectively grasp that. So what would have been helpful in the beginning is seeing a few visual examples, walk through a demo beginning to end on some of these images to see how are you interpreting this particular cell cluster, this type of tissue, etc. And we didn't really get that until we were a few weeks in, and that was not ideal. They did have some written instructions, but I wouldn't say it was quite as generic as what we see on the screen here, but definitely could have been a lot more thorough given the subjectivity behind what we were annotating. However, on the flip side, I had a client in the fashion industry, and admittedly, we didn't start off great, but we've really gotten to the point where we have what we call internally here the client Bible, and it is essentially a website chock full of resources that we can always go back to, knowing that that's the source of truth. And that ranges from PowerPoint presentations that they've put together for us with visual examples of how we should annotate certain clothing items, down to the granular level of fabric types and color classification. It's a lot of information. It probably veers closer to your textbook example of you have 40 pages of instruction. But because it's organized well and that we have a really good understanding for the type of information that's relevant to our work, it's easy to reference back and find, hey, I'm looking for what type of blouse is this in this color with this pattern, how should I annotate that? And it's much easier than having to go back to the client every time to say, how would you annotate this? And so having that Bible of sorts has been just super instrumental in our success and really making sure that the client interaction is there when needed, but it's not we're not relying on them completely.
Yeah, that's a great point. So yeah, the guidelines can be quite dense, but if they're really well organized and structured, and that can be super helpful. So I think we've got an example here next of just really high level of what we've seen work well in data labeling. So going back to the first pitfall, right? Always keeping that why in the context front and center, since this is going to be a frequently referenced set of documentation. And then also being clear on the what and the how. And to Anne's point, a picture speaks 1,000 words. And so having examples of correct examples, incorrect examples that we can just pull as we keep working through the project really brings the descriptions to life. And we mentioned up front around this topic of ownership. So we want to be able to take off as much as we can off the plate of our clients, because this is what we do, right? This is our specialty is data labeling. That said, there are some unique things that are really important for kind of the owner of the outcome, the kind of the model, to be involved. And one of those things is to really kind of take ownership of whatever that source of truth is for the guidelines. Because, you know, to Anne's analogy of this Bible, right? It's like ultimately you're, you know, hiring or paying or, you know, bringing somebody internally to kind of serve this overall objective. And it's just really, you know, really important that whatever's kind of on that page is exactly what you need in kind of your request to get your work done. So we can help with the means for the guidelines, but ultimately the kind of the words on the page are it's, you know, really important for that to be owned by kind of the person that's ultimately going to own the model. Yeah.
And actually, Paul, I have one other point that we maybe didn't cover before this that I'm thinking about now. Having that clear documentation and labeling also ensures that if you have turnover or you decide to switch providers or anything like that, you're going to have this source of truth that carries over. You know, a lot of times when the instructions are unclear, you eventually get to a good place because your labelers are learning by doing. If those labels go away for one reason or another, having that baseline to return to is just super important. And so I've seen that happen sometimes when we have, you know, new labelers coming in with unclear documentation. It takes that learning wrap just that much longer if there's not a really good baseline to learn from.
Great point. Great point. All right, pitfall number 3.
Yeah, so this one is something that we really specialize in, human in the loop, but minimizing the importance of that can be really dangerous in annotating. So a lot of times clients will come to us and just say, oh, the humans in the loop are just labelers. And they can really be so much more than that, giving you feedback on things like your tool or your process or your workflow. So, you know, what else can go wrong, Paul, when you're thinking of human in the loop as just labelers?
Yeah, just there's a big risk in general to being able to successfully get into production and not hit that you know, issue that we saw in the hype curve at the beginning. But yeah, basically, you know, that the human in the loop is kind of the canary in the coal mine in a lot of ways during the labeling process to make sure that the annotation strategy that's been identified is actually the right one, and that's, you know, it's working. We've actually got in our platform an annotation model that is learning in a custom way with each new piece of data that's being labeled. And so you actually have a human labeler who kind of in real time is seeing the predictions from our model, and the strategy is right. They should see those predictions just getting better and better. And if not, that's a good time to flag that and to kind of rework the strategy. So from that aspect, you know, the human workforce is super important. And you know, we also certainly work in other platforms as well. So Anne, I'm not sure if do you have an example where similarly sort of it was the workforce was able to sort of identify something really, really early in an important way?
Yeah, so one of the clients I work with, we actually do work in their platform. And so the data that our labelers are receiving has already gone through a certain amount of AI, and we almost act as a quality control layer. And so at a certain point, our labelers were saying, you know what, we're getting served some weird data that's not often correct, and it just doesn't seem right. And, you know, if they were just mindlessly annotating this information, then it would have gone unnoticed. And instead, a lot of them raised their hand and said, hey, what's going on here? Can we check with them to make sure this AI is actually working correctly? Because we're seeing a lot of weird information. And on our next client call, we brought this up with them, and they were kind of surprised, but said, oh, we'll check with our engineering team. And sure enough, they found a pretty substantial bug in the way that they were automating some of the stuff that was being sent to us. And so our resources, human in the loop resources, were able to identify a problem within our own own clients' software and platform that likely saved them a lot of resources and time, having identified it early on rather than just letting it go unnoticed for however long it might have been. So yeah, they were definitely not this drone mindless chugging along annotating workforce. Really gave their honest opinion back, and it benefited them in the end.
Yeah, so that's a great example in that the role is not just limited to actually labeling data. There's value in being part of the QA or QC, whether that QA QC is reviewing what another human has labeled, or whether that's reviewing what maybe automated labeling has produced, as well as if you've got a model in production and you need to sustain that model and keep it high quality as new data is collected. There's also certainly value in that human in the loop being there to handle exceptions and resolve those exceptions again when a model's in production to sustain that per the graphic here. Moving along, I think another thing that we wanted to call out is we see a lot of different kind of quality workflows in our industry, and I certainly have seen clients that have maybe put a lot of emphasis on what you see at the bottom there of a consensus-based approach, which it can help with quality, right? Because you've got multiple passes, multiple kind of people who are having to independently label something. But I think you're kind of undervaluing the power of a well-trained, well-equipped, highly motivated person in the loop who frankly can get it right the first time if you've got the proper quality controls. And so when done right, we try to follow more something that's oftentimes in that middle path where you're having fewer touches, more of a kind of a thoughtful, lightweight QA, and you're trying to get it right the first time with reasonable check and balance. So I think if you invest in the right way into your human in the loop workforce, you can definitely get more for less and not have to kind of run this consensus approach, which cannot be frankly a good use of resources and overly complex.
Yeah, this is one of my favorite slides to review with our clients, especially as they're coming into CloudFactory. Is there are a couple of different flavors of how we approach quality, and I always layer on top of this, like one of the most important components of this is almost the step you don't see here, where the client's giving feedback to us. And so yes, that's definitely super important, and making sure you have strong feedback loops is paramount to making sure that we are continuously, as a labeling provider, improving and learning from our mistakes, and part of that is client participation, but we also do a lot of that internally with this review and improve step. It's my favorite one too.
Yeah. Now, Anne, before we get to Pitfall 4, I'm wondering if you've got that harp behind you. I've got a piano here. I mean, I was thinking maybe like a little interlude. But maybe for the next session, so we can go to Pitfall 4.
We need to rehearse that part.
Yeah.
All right, Pitfall 4, much more important topic, is over-rotating on automation. And so I hear this a lot, honestly, and I think that it's very trendy right now as the computer vision, AI, machine learning efforts kind of evolve to want to automate as much as possible. And while automation can be super helpful and a game changer in a lot of cases, you can also find yourself in a tough spot if you introduce it too early, or if you're doing the wrong type of automation. If you're using it incorrectly, you can kind of fall into that 87% fail rate, I think is what you had said, Paul, at the top of the call. So what are some examples of automation being used effectively and maybe not so effectively?
Yeah, so the question of whether or not to use pre-labeled data, that's a question we're getting a lot these days. Again, one of those things that on the surface seems like it makes a lot of sense, right? Because you're basically having a machine run through something first, and then just a more a human workforce as kind of a backstop. But if you're not careful, there's this pitfall of basically, you send pre-labeled data to a workforce, and if that data is from a fairly static model that's not adapting and evolving, the quality of the pre-labeled data may not be where you want it to be, and so the result is that basically you get this kind of pre-labeled data that you just basically need to start from scratch and relabel over, and now you're just basically creating more work as part of the flow. So yeah, particularly for use cases where you're refreshing the model by going out to taking data from new cities or new retail environments and refreshing your model. If that pre-labeled data is not evolving and adapting, it's sometimes more trouble than it's worth. That said, there is a place for automation and doing it in the right way. So yeah, I don't know. Anne, anything you'd add before we kind of hit the upside here?
We talked about human in the loop being super important. So how can you maybe use the combination of human in the loop and automation together?
Yeah. So we've got a visual here on the next slide, but what we've seen as a best practice is use of labeling platforms that, as I kind of referred to earlier, they're learning as you're going. So there's some out of the box automation that's trained on open source data and kind of general data. But as you're actually labeling more and more, having a platform where there's a model that's actually now starting to tailor and customize itself to what it's learning along the way creates for much more accurate, efficient use of automation. And if it really gets strong enough, you can get to a point where now you're going to an entire data set and you're applying that custom model against images and labeling the rest of the data set. You still want to have a backstop and have a process where certainly if there's anything low confidence from the automation, that you've got a kind of a station where a person can review and apply human judgment and probably review that corner case. But that idea of kind of progressively adapting customized models used for annotation, we found to really be kind of the sweet spot.
Yeah, I actually have had clients that have come to us and said, hey, can you work off pre-labeled data? And we say, sure. And then come to find out that pre-labeled data is completely off. It's kind of like the example I used before with the AI not being exactly right. And just saying, like, it'd probably just be easier if we started this from scratch. So you need to make sure that pre-labeled data has some factual basis and it was powered well before you start introducing it.
Yep. All right, we're going to move on to the fifth and final pitfall. And this one, I enjoy a good nerd out here. I love talking about quality and root cause and all of that. So, quality for this industry and for all of our clients, like it's table stakes. I mean, you've maybe heard it a million times, but it's like you put bad quality in, you get bad quality out on your model. So this is just really super important. And there's a lot of pitfalls, associated with it. And so oftentimes, maybe, parties will kind of look on the surface and point fingers, but it's oftentimes more nuanced once you get into the 5 whys. Yeah, so Anne, maybe turn it over to you to see if you've got an example in this area.
Yeah, I've got a couple. There's a recent one that comes to mind, actually, again in the medical field, that we had actually really good documentation, really great examples, very huge reliance on human in the loop, which is all good. But once we got a few weeks into production, we had recognized that the data we were getting input from the client was originally in video format, and they had said basically every couple of frames we'd like to annotate and do some object identification. It was clear after, again, a few weeks that there was some inconsistencies, and what what the client kind of assumed was, oh, your cloud workers, or what we call labelers, are just not getting it. And so after further analysis, the client actually kind of said, well, are you guys labeling these in order? Because they were originally in video files. And you know, we had said that the tool we were using didn't accommodate for that. So if that's something they thought would be helpful, then let's explore a different tool. And so in fact, our cloud workers really got the hang of it very quickly and were very good at object identification, but not having those frames in sequential order. It may have been that one labeler thought this was a scalpel and the other thought this was a camera. But if they had had that consistency all the way through, you know, this group of cells or this tissue would be identified as the same component all the way through the video. And switching to make that sequential really helped with the quality in the end. So it was more of potentially a tooling issue than a competency issue.
That's partly what makes it so complicated, right? Is data labeling is a field of, again, people, process, technology. So when you're doing root cause, you almost have to go through each of those areas. So in that case, it sounds like it was a tool. Sound like do you have another one you want to share?
No, I think that's the one that's the one that comes to mind most readily. Yeah, I can brainstorm on that a little bit.
Sure. Yeah. All right. Well, I know we've got some questions at the end too. So
yeah.
So let's get into the resolution here, and yeah, I want to share some best practices on how to do those 5 whys, get to the root cause, triage, and you know, take the right preventative or corrective action depending on what the issue is. And so we definitely look to, where possible, use technology to assist with this. So it's really helpful if in that technology and in the insights and reporting, you can get data and insights that actually show kind of where the potential hotspots of quality issues are. So one report we use is a confusion matrix, and that's basically looking at comparing a label class that was predicted by the annotation model versus what label class was actually applied during the process. And kind of, you know, things start to light up if you know, more and more where there's those disagreements between classes, and that's where you really want to dive in. So when you dive in, we tend to find that there's one of 3 major issues. One issue is around the skewness of data. So when you're working through a use case and annotations around a small number of classes are more weighted, and you haven't seen kind of the full distribution of classes, especially if you're relying on a model to assist with where the confusion is, it's a signal that, hey, maybe we haven't labeled enough data, or maybe we haven't kind of pulled in the right data to label. So one action or one capability that can be used to address this is if you've got capabilities around, say, active learning, where you can actually pull in with priority new image inputs that currently have the lowest kind of occurrence or lowest confidence, and that can help to kind of spread the distribution of images more evenly. A second reason we often see for you know, quality issues and ambiguity is actually down to the human aspect. Maybe just there's not the right interpretation of the guidelines. Like if you go back as sort of a delivery lead and you're saying, you know, these are pretty clear, but I'm going into examples and seeing that the labelers are just, they're not understanding something for whatever reason. You can triage that, and you can maybe identify, is this something that's more kind of widespread, that it's an issue that you have a large number of labelers who are all having the same issue, or it's just isolated to, you know, a small number of individuals. depending on that, you can either kind of do broader kind of retraining, or if it's individuals, that may just make sense to do a more kind of targeted coaching. And then third and finally, another reason that we often see is, again, ties nicely to the second pitfall, but if we're looking through examples where there's ambiguity in the confusion matrix, we can maybe see that actually this is a real edge case. Like if you look at the guidelines, like you can very logically follow them and get to a variety of different answers. And so what that triggers is, let's look back at the guidelines. Let's look at how detailed they are. Let's look at some of the examples that we have that people are learning from. And let's see if we can tighten that up in partnership with a client or whoever's kind of hiring you to do the work. And that's a very collaborative thing. Yeah, just a few different areas and hopefully some tips around doing that root cause to get super high quality. So yeah, I think we've gotten through all 5 and we've got a little bit more time. So why don't you kind of wrap us up, Anne, and then we can maybe do some questions.
Absolutely. Yeah, so we covered 5 pitfalls. Of course, there are many other pitfalls that we maybe didn't cover today, but hopefully we've armed you with some solutions and resolutions to address these 5. First one being not making the why clear. The way to fix that is ensure the broader context is clear. Why are we doing this? What's the motivation for the labelers to do the work? Number 2, delivering unclear annotation guidelines. So to fix that, we just want you to provide simple and clear instructions with lots of examples, lots of visuals. Be thorough, but not overly expansive. Number 3, minimizing the importance of human in the loop. We obviously believe here that human in the loop is irreplaceable. Make sure you're using skilled labelers throughout the AI development, both from a labeling perspective, from a feedback loop perspective, from a quality assurance perspective. Number 4 is over-rotating on automation, pre-labeling, etc. To address that, use adaptive AI assistance approach that Paul reviewed, making sure that there is some component of human feedback in there and then iteratively progressing. And finally, number 5, not getting to the root cause of quality issues. So conduct that root cause analysis and make sure that you're identifying the actual problem rather than making some assumptions, and you should be in great shape.
All right. Cassie, do we have any questions queued up?
We do. So we got a couple questions in the chat. I'm going to kick one off, I think, for Anne, but really either of you. The question's around just any examples of data labeling projects we've worked on in the manufacturing sector. I'm also going to call out here that we actually did, some of our colleagues did an industrial asset management webinar a few weeks ago. So definitely I'll pop the link to the asker of that question. But Anne, any examples that you might have around what people are doing in the manufacturing space with AI?
Yeah, so manufacturing, I feel like that could be in a lot of different industries of manufacturing, but absolutely, I know we have done, I'm thinking of something that's more like construction based, but analyzing workspaces and trying to find efficiencies in how humans are utilizing machinery, or how we are, how the companies are, progressing items through the production lines, etc. So there's definitely uses for that for sure. I think we'd have to have a little more context around the company in question asking that, but yeah, definitely a lot of uses within manufacturing. I don't know if Paul, you have any hands-on experience for that.
Yeah, some of the ones I've been involved with are kind of in that area of like robotic inspection, and that may include efficient ways, basically using computer vision to identify defects on assembly lines. I've seen some that are more kind of like picking and sorting. So we've worked with companies, say, in the recycling space, and they're looking for more efficient ways of using robotics to sort recycled goods from trash. So I think there are a lot of definitely computer vision applications, and we'd love to learn more. Yeah, if that person wants to surface more details, and we can see if we can help.
Awesome. All right, here's another one for you, Paul. This is about quality. So what's the best way to measure labeling quality?
Yes, that is a really good question. I think my overarching answer is just make sure you're measuring somehow. The worst thing that you can do is to not measure at all. You've often heard you can't manage what you don't measure. So there are kind of ideal ways of measuring, and then just sort of like minimum viable. Whenever possible, if the data is there, if the process can be there, we recommend drilling down to kind of what are the logical error types given the work, the use case, and so categories like misclassified labels, missing labels, extra labels, and then you can apply a metric against each of those to kind of know whether you're sort of things are good, they're bad, or somewhere in between. And so precision, recall, etc. So in terms of when you're going to do that measurement, obviously you need to measure some kind of a delta. One part of the delta is like the ground truth. And so, yeah, I've kind of seen an evolution over the years where the default had been kind of like a client internal team had staffed with like experts, and they were like doing QC and kind of grading and measuring. That still requires a lot of resources. So, CloudFactory, we've kind of taken that on in some cases and served kind of escalated, kind of had a tier of experts who we played that grading QC role. And now what's really kind of cool is that where you've got platforms where you've actually got a model inside of that labeling platform, you can actually harness and use that for ground truth and compare recent labels against this model to kind of see where the difference is. So that would be the ideal. Minimum, give a letter grade of A, B, C, D, hopefully not a lot of Fs, but again, something is better than nothing.
Perfect. All right, this one's for Anne. Obviously, a lot of the pitfalls and resolutions that we talked about could apply to both internal teams or, outsourcing vendors like ourselves. So what's your advice for companies brand new to outsourced labeling and how they can avoid these pitfalls?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it kind of comes back to that providing good guidelines and just being open to that feedback loop. I would say when in doubt, provide more information than not enough, and think about visuals, especially making sure that if you can record demos, if you can provide data sets with a lot of variety in it so that we can see what the different types of images that are going to run the gamut from super simple to super complex would be. Make sure that you are prepared to invest a lot of time at the beginning, and then have confidence knowing that your vendor, CloudFactory or otherwise, will get the initial feedback and use that to their advantage so that you can take a step back as we get more and more comfortable with it, but knowing that that upfront investment is super important so that we can really hit the ground running as your partner. And then be ready to communicate a lot and be really collaborative, because there's a lot of times that we'll have clients come to us and then we'll kind of piecemeal how to collaborate along the way. So if there's certain tools that you use in advance, like a file sharing mechanism or communication methods like Slack or Teams or whatever it may be, do you have a project management software that you use? Make sure that whoever you decide to use as your vendor has access to all that in advance so that we can kind of be prepared to hit the ground running again. So really being overly collaborative is the best advice I can give you so that you can really have a partner and almost an extension of your company rather than thinking of it as an exported or outsourced process.
Perfect. All right, last question, and then we can wrap up for today. Thanks, guys. So for Paul, what should someone look for to ensure they're selecting the right tool for their annotations?
Yes. So people, process, technology. Again, annotation tools are certainly part of that technology side and super important. And yeah, there's really a growing list of tools in the market. It's been a fairly fragmented part of the data labeling space, but there's some tools that kind of started to really stand out. And many of them specialize in a particular kind of industry or domain. So if you're a company that works in a certain space, I would use that with some of your searches and research, just to see if there's something that's been more purpose-built for your industry. Some companies are getting a little broader in what they offer, but yeah, I think just from experience, a couple good questions to consider when doing an evaluation is, again, knowing that data labeling is this kind of combination. It's not just, the tool isn't going to solve everything. You've got humans in the loop and process. So how well is that tool going to be integrated with those other ingredients that need to come together to ultimately get the output that you want? So what's that level of integration with people and process? And then secondly, how well is the tool going to support what is likely to be rapid iteration? So a lot of what we see in the market are ML teams who are doing lots of experimentation and need a lot of agility and iteration, and they're kind of pivoting as they learn. So does the tool support that? So another question that I'd ask, but I think that's it. Cool. Well, yeah, Cassie, I appreciate the questions, and I'll just say personally, very grateful for the opportunity to be able to share here, and hopefully you took away, again, at least a couple things that you can avoid going forward to make the most of your data labeling investments and get the best return. Anne, anything you want to close with?
No, it's been a pleasure, and yeah, hopefully this was helpful to you guys, and yeah, welcome any questions. Feel free to reach out if you think of anything.
All right.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks a lot.